Whenever somebody is diagnosed with cancer, one of the first questions they have is about chemotherapy. Maybe the most recognizable thing about cancer is that getting chemotherapy can make you lose your hair and be very sick. And that's true. But did you know that there are actually a lot of cancer treatment options that don't include chemotherapy at all? Today, we're going to talk about chemotherapy, but also about the 5 additional ways that we can treat cancer in 2023 in addition to chemotherapy. So what is chemotherapy? Well, it's the oldest and most well-known way of treating cancer. And it works by killing dividing cells. So despite there being many different types of chemotherapy that all work in unique ways, what they all ultimately share is this ability to kill cells that are trying to divide. And what cancer is a group of rapidly dividing cells. So that makes sense. But it means that chemotherapy will kill cancer cells trying to divide and also any other cells in your body that are trying to divide, which is why there can be some pretty rough side effects. So how does chemotherapy kill dividing cells? Well, in order for a cell to divide, it needs to make a copy of all its DNA, and then it needs to be able to separate into 2 cells and send 1 copy of DNA into each of the 2 new cells. All the different types of chemotherapy work by inserting themselves into a part of that process and causing problems. So some chemotherapy drugs bind to DNA and prevent it from being able to copy itself. Others prevent it from being able to separate the DNA and send it into the 2 separate cells that are trying to form. Let me show you a picture to really illustrate what this looks like. This is a picture I took with a fancy microscope, and if this is the first time you've ever seen a cell in real life, just take it in. It's beautiful. This is an actual human cell. I remember the first time I saw these images, I was just blown away. There are trillions of these beautiful things all working together to allow you to move and breathe. It's like everything feels so infinite. When you zoom down to an area smaller than the head of a pin and you see this, and then you zoom out to an area larger than you can comprehend and you see this, it's just, isn't that wild? Anyways, what you're seeing here is a cell getting ready to divide. It has its DNA packaged in chromosomes, here in white, all lined up in a nice line. And it has these fine red cables, dozens and dozens of them, all attached to the chromosomes. And what's going to happen is that these cables will pull the chromosomes apart. And when they do, it will look something like this. And then eventually the cell will separate into 2 individual cells, like this. So one way chemotherapy can kill a dividing cell is by jamming up these cables so that they can't separate the chromosomes. The cell just gets stuck here for hours and hours, unable to divide, and eventually it will die. It's pretty cool. Because cancer cells divide a lot, chemotherapy will kill a lot of cancer cells, which is good. But it will also kill the cells that line your digestive tract, because they also divide a lot. And so you'll feel very sick, which is bad. It will also kill the cells that make your hair grow, so your hair will fall out. It will even kill some of the blood cells that make your immune system so that you're more likely to get sick with other things. So there's lots of bad here. Now, today, chemotherapy is often the backbone of many cancer treatments, and it often works well. But it is not the only option we have. There are many others. Another way that we treat cancer is with radiation. Okay, radiation therapy uses very precise beams of high energy that basically just destroy the DNA of a cell, which causes it to die. Now, the way we use radiation to specifically target the cancer cells is that we do lots of scans to find out exactly where the tumor is. Then we shoot all these beams of radiation towards it. Now, if a tumor is, say, deep in your lungs, we have to shoot that radiation through all of your tissues, past skin, muscles, bone, blood vessels, and lots of areas of good lung before it gets to the tumor. But the way that we prevent too much damage to all the tissue we have to go through is that we use several lower power beams of radiation, where each beam on its own isn't very strong. But we aim all of these beams coming from all different directions so that they meet in one very precise spot. And that point of convergence, where all the beams come together, is hit with a very powerful dose of radiation because it's the combined energy of all the individual beams. And we make sure that the area where the tumor is sees that high dose of radiation, and the surrounding tissues do not. Now, very often, radiation and chemotherapy go hand in hand. We often just call it chemoradiation, which means someone will be getting chemotherapy over several weeks, and then while they're getting chemotherapy, they'll also get radiation treatments. So we're hitting the cancer from both angles, using both chemicals and radiation to kill the tumor cells. The side effects of radiation are damage to the surrounding tissues, but at least we can kind of localize that and minimize damage elsewhere. We also have what are called targeted therapies. Now, chemo and radiation have been around for a long time because in order to figure them out, we didn't have to understand cancer all that well. Chemotherapy was invented by accident after people started using mustard gas in World War I, and they figured out it could kill rapidly dividing cells. They said, hey, let's just try it on some cancer, and it worked. And radiation therapy is basically just recognizing that a tumor is bad, and then figuring out how to aim energy at the bad thing. But targeted therapies are the product of intense cancer research, where we have discovered which gene out of the 30,000 genes in our cells, which one gene is being mutated and driving a specific cancer's growth. Targeted therapies work by inhibiting the cancer-causing genes or by exploiting the subtle genetic differences between cancer cells and normal cells. And it turns out these drugs are really hard to develop and really hard to get to work. A good thing about these drugs is that they're often just pills you can take at home. You don't need to go to an infusion center and get these intense, toxic chemotherapy drugs through an IV. You can just pick them up at a pharmacy and take them once or twice a day. Like any medication, they have side effects, but they tend to be tolerated pretty well because they are just targeting the mutated gene, just targeting the abnormal cancer cells. I had a patient this week. He has lung cancer. It spread to his brain, his bones, into his liver. And he got chemotherapy, he got radiation, and we scanned him again, and the cancer is still growing. You know, even 5 years ago, we would have had nothing to offer him. But just recently, a new targeted therapy was approved that targets the specific genetic mutation that we found when we sequenced his tumor cells. So instead of saying, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do, we got to say, thanks to the amazing research that has happened over the past decades, we have a new option for you to try. And I have to say, as someone who did a PhD in cancer biology, research can be so frustrating. And sometimes you feel just so far away from actually making a difference. You know, as you're carrying your little plate of cells, trying to get an experiment to work for the millionth time, and of course, failing. To be able to see a new discovery from just a few years ago make its way to the clinic, which was the culmination of decades of work and thousands of people all across the world contributing a little here and a little there, inching our understanding forward, culminating in the development of a new drug. It was great. It was just really, really great. Some cancers can be treated with hormone therapy. We've learned that some cancers are actually driven by the natural hormones we produce in our body. And we learned that if we can turn off the hormone, we can basically starve the cancer of the fuel it needs and cause it to die. This is true of some types of breast cancer and also prostate cancer. Some breast cancers are driven by estrogen or progesterone, and some prostate cancers are driven by testosterone. So we can use drugs that will block those hormones to specifically treat those cancers. These therapies are also often just pills that you can take and have overall a pretty good side effect profile. You're not going to lose your hair or end up in the hospital because of these medications. So if you have the specific type of cancer that is hormone driven, these can be very effective. Immunotherapy. Immunotherapy is by far the most exciting cancer therapy development in my lifetime. For a long time, we wondered why our immune system doesn't recognize and kill the cancer cells in our body. Well, it turns out the answer is that cancer cells express a protein on the surface of their cells that tricks our immune system. When our immune cells are sniffing around looking for stuff to kill and they find a cancer cell, this protein interacts with the immune cell and basically puts it to sleep. In this way, cancer cells are able to hide from the immune system, which is bad. But now we have immunotherapy. And what it does is basically covers up that protein on the cancer cells and stops it from putting our immune cells to sleep. So then our immune cells are able to find the cancer cells in our body and kill them. This has been amazing, okay? Originally, this was found to work in melanoma. It was a big deal because there was this whole group of people who had incurable melanomas and were almost certainly going to die. And then we gave them immunotherapy and their immune systems wiped out these previously incurable cancers. They were completely cured. And then we tried it in lots of different cancers, and it kept working. There are still a lot of clinical trials happening as we speak that are discovering that immunotherapy on its own, or in combination with some other forms of treatment, is very effective. Another form of immunotherapy we sometimes use is when we take the immune cells out of someone with cancer, and then in a lab we engineer those immune cells to attack the cancer cells inside that patient. We then put the immune cells back into the patient, and then the immune cells go nuts and kill the cancer cells. You know, similarly, you may have heard about vaccines to treat cancer. They also operate on a similar principle. by priming the immune system to recognize and attack tumor cells. Either way, the key to immunotherapy is just unleashing our own immune system and letting it kill the cancer cells. These treatments can have some bad side effects. You won't lose your hair, but it can sometimes cause your immune system to also attack your own normal, non-cancer cells, which can be bad. So the side effects can be sometimes unpredictable, but overall, this innovation has cured many otherwise incurable cancers. You know, the simplest cancer treatment we have out there is surgery. And I can just imagine all the surgeons rolling their eyes at me, calling surgery simple. And to them I say, call me back when I paid you. I'm just kidding. Surgeons are amazing, but seriously, very hard to get a hold of sometimes. Now, I don't mean to say that surgery is a simple thing. Surgery is often very complicated, and I am amazed at what surgeons are capable of doing. But you know, from a scientific perspective, surgery is pretty simple in that it's just intuitively removing the tumor from a patient's body and just doing our best to make sure that we get all the cancer cells out, which can be tricky. Surgery is usually an option for tumors that haven't yet spread. Okay, so we've caught it early enough that the tumor is still localized to one part of the body, and we can go in there and spoon it out like a little ice cream cone of death, which is exactly what you'd want to do if you have an ice cream cone of death inside you. So, when someone gets cancer, often we start with some combination of chemotherapy, radiation, targeted therapies, hormone therapies, or immunotherapy. If surgery is appropriate, we might offer them surgery, and sometimes we'll even treat them with some of these therapies prior to surgery to help shrink the tumor before we remove it. Or sometimes we do surgery first and then offer some of these therapies to make sure any cancer cells that we left behind also get killed. So it's a lot of mixing and matching based on what has the best evidence for working in your particular cancer. And then, depending how your cancer responds to the first line of therapy, we can adjust and try to add on different variations of these classes of medications to find some combination of treatments that will work. But the reality is sometimes no matter what we try, nothing works, and the cancer continues to grow. And when that happens, it's devastating. But trust me when I tell you that in all of medicine, there is not an area that is more exciting with more new therapies and new possibilities just beyond the horizon than there are right now in cancer research. The most reassuring thing I have found in working in this field, let me reassure you, okay, there are so many smart people, smarter than I could ever have imagined, and they're directing all of their brain power, all of their efforts, all of their energy at this problem. So trust me when I tell you, big things are coming.